What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with a quick reaction video to the latest trailer for Season 3 of House of the Dragon, coming our way on June 21st. There'll be 8 episodes total, and if this show manages to deliver on the level of Season 1 of House of the Dragon, or Episode 4 of Season 2 of House of the Dragon, well then we will have had at that point 14 great episodes of George R. R. Martin adaptations in calendar year 2026, and I'm rooting hard for the show to deliver. I saw some warning signs in Season 2 that had me a little alarmed, but the reality is I fucking love the world of George R. R. Martin. It is my second favorite fantasy series of the 21st century. My favorite fantasy series of the 21st century is the Second Apocalypse series by R. Scott Baker, but no one's ever going to make a show of that because it's just too depraved and too disturbing. It makes George R. R. Martin seem like C.S. Lewis by comparison, but what did we learn from A Night of the Seven Kingdoms? We learned that it is still possible to deliver a really good show based on George R. R. Martin's books if you stick to the text. And my biggest complaint about Season 2 of House of the Dragon, even though I thought Episode 4 was fucking amazing and I watched it over and over and over. I mean, I'm got my D&D books right here. I like watching dragons fight, and that episode delivered. But the show showed some warning signs of not understanding the characters or the story at play, specifically with the characters of Rhaenyra and Alicent. If you read Fire and Blood, which is, basically, it's the history of the Targaryens, the first half of the Targaryen dynasty, up through the point where they finally lose all their dragons. But as written, Rhaenyra and Alicent are as power-mad and ambitious and aggressive and bloodthirsty as any of the female characters you'll see in a show like Rome or like Spartacus, Blood and Sand. And I can tell that showrunner Ryan Condal, he's trying to turn Alicent and Rhaenyra into kind of the good guys of the show. The only two people, advocating for peace and trying to keep the bloodshed to a minimum. But when you read the book, you're like, girls, calm down. Put away your knives and stop acting like such psychos. And if you don't stick to that version of the characters, it creates a butterfly effect. Like minor changes early in a story or at the midway point in the story will affect what comes after. You cannot make changes that don't have a ripple effect later in the text. And I just feel like, how are you going to end the story properly if you're not adapting the character of Rhaenyra? Like the way she's written by George R. R. Martin. And the big warning sign was sometime right before the release of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, George R. R. Martin publicly stated, "This is no longer my story." And I can't remember which change he was referring to, or maybe it was like basically a report about a private meeting between George R. R. Martin and Ryan Condal, but they're no longer on speaking terms. So I hope that Ryan Condal can redeem the show and win back the love and affection of George R. R. Martin. But I'll either reread the sections on the Dance with the Dragons in this book, or I'll listen to the audiobook between now and then, because before I do commentary about George R. R. Martin shows, I have to kind of unlock those parts of my brain that kind of go dormant or go to sleep in between seasons. But if I'm going to bitch accurately about changes, I will need to refresh my memory about the story. But another ingredient that Season 3 of House of the Dragon needs to get right, they need to let Daemon Targaryen off the fucking leash. He was completely squandered and wasted in Season 2. They gave him nothing to do, whereas in Season 1, he was a total badass, and in a lot of ways kind of stole the show. And I think a lot of people in Hollywood are like, oh no, like people are identifying with and rooting for the bad guy. That's why we read this crap. We don't read this crap because we want to see people picking flowers and petting puppies. We want to see dark, savage Targaryens going to war with each other, kicking all kinds of ass, doing horrible, depraved shit. And if you don't get that, well, then you probably shouldn't be working on these kinds of shows. But if the show manages to deliver, it'll extend a pretty good hot streak that HBO has been on recently. A Night of the Seven Kingdoms was fantastic. I've been enjoying Euphoria Season 3, even though it's pure trash. Every episode gives me something to either laugh at or be shocked by or aroused by or whatever. And I've also been enjoying their show Dark Wizard, all about the climber Dean Potter. If you've ever liked watching shows or movies or documentaries about mountain climbing, Dean Potter was a pretty haunted individual, but a really cool kind of dark countercultural figure. It's 2 episodes deep. I don't know how far it's going to go. But, I love having an excuse to watch HBO every week. So I'm hoping that this summer, if everything goes right, Season 3 of House of the Dragon might be more interesting and more compelling and more entertaining than any of the big movies coming out. Or who knows, maybe The Odyssey will totally obliterate it and make it seem inept by comparison. But if this show is good, 2026 will turn into a great year for book adaptations, because we've already had Project Hail Mary based on a book. We've had A Night of the Seven Kingdoms based on a book. The Odyssey, if it delivers, will be a great adaptation of Homer. And if Dune Part 3 can deliver, it'll be a great adaptation of... Where's my copy? Oh, I've been reading it, rereading it, getting prepared, of Dune Messiah. So if 2026 can kind of secretly turn into a great year for book adaptations, that'll put a big giant smile on my face. At any rate, even if I had my grievances with Season 2, as you can tell, I'm very excited to sink my teeth into this show. So let's go ahead and watch this trailer and see what it's all about. In 3, 2, 1!
You now have the power no man has ever wielded. You will have an empire unassailable, Rhaenyra. And our children will rule it forever and a day.
Yeah, baby. Go to the dark side! Fire and blood.
All that remains is for you to decide what you want from this war.
For your enemies to be ashes.
You do things that your heart would have recoiled from before you came to the throne.
The Targaryens are a savage race.
That's a great shot.
We act with holy purpose to restore a rightful king.
Poor guy.
I'm going to kill my brother or die in the attempt.
Looking rough.
Draw your sword.
Look to the sky. Doom and ruin surround us. We will all become beasts before our end.
It is no longer safe here.
I'm liking all of this.
There will be no doubt who the gods have chosen to rule.
All right, that's what I'm talking about. That was a very encouraging trailer. Bring it on. All right, now admittedly I've been fooled by great trailers in the past, but that trailer was very encouraging because it seemed to suggest at least there'll be a lot of fire and blood. I mean, the book's called Fire and Blood. Bring on the fire and blood. I want to see ships in ruins. I want to see fields of ash. I want to see dead, charred bodies, smoldering in their armor. Because, well, every once in a while we'll see a Targaryen who's a noble, benevolent individual. They do exist. On the whole, they're bloodthirsty, like conquerors. I mean, the original Targaryen who made the name famous is Aegon the Conqueror. And speaking of which, they're working on a movie for Aegon the Conqueror. And if you want to know the story of Aegon the Conqueror in full, like the first 80 or 90 pages of this book, it's all about Aegon the Conqueror and his two sisters. The question is, though, where do you end that story? I would recommend they end it with the final fate of Maegor, because I don't know if Maegor will ever get his own show or have enough story, but you could totally show... Anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked talking about Maegor, but he's my favorite evil Targaryen. There are a lot of dark Targaryens who give the Targaryens a bad name. Maegor is the worst of them all. But when it comes to the question of where to end the story, House of the Dragon does have a very tricky problem on their hands, because I believe they're committed through 4 seasons, but the book Fire and Blood continues for quite a bit after the Dance of the Dragons. But there's not an obvious battle or climax or moment of betrayal where you can kind of wrap things up. There's kind of like a series of diminishing returns of like betrayals and skirmishes and that sort of thing. So I have no idea how they'll choose to wrap up the story. It's going to be a very complicated riddle to solve for the writers of the show. But the good news is for season 3, if they adapt it properly, we've got some major battles to look forward to, some horrible betrayals, some horrible backstabbing, all sorts of, all the wholesome ingredients that we look for in George R. Martin's material. And who knows? I mean, I know George R. Martin's now like 74, 75. I keep hoping that he'll give us one more novella or one more book before he decides to retire or die or whatever. And the question is, if I could choose what he would deliver, if he was only going to deliver one book, would I want novellas 4 and 5 for Night of the Seven Kingdoms? Would I want part 2 of Fire and Blood? Or would I want The Winds of Winter, which would be the book 6 of A Song of Ice and Fire? It's complicated, because if he were to write, or if he were to finish Winds of Winter, and I think like 1,000 pages have been written, that would still leave A Dream of Spring, his 7th final book, unfinished. So we would still be unsatisfied, but at least a big chunk of that's already been written, so he could just get that out the door. That would be great. But I wouldn't mind knowing what happens in novellas 4 and 5 in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, because I'm very curious about the final fate of Aegon V and Duncan the Tall. But I'm dying to know what happens in part 2 of Fire and Blood as well. But I will take anything. If he wants to write a cookbook, like, bring it on. But George R. R. Martin, you're still young enough where you can finish something before you put this story to bed once and for all. And the reality is, no matter what he chooses to finish, or if he finishes anything at all, there will always be some blank spots on the map as far as our total knowledge of this world is concerned. But between the 5 books from A Song of Ice and Fire, as well as Fire and Blood and A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, he's given us enough where fans of his work will continue to reread and discuss and debate and hypothesize until the end of time. However, moving forward, if you're talking to like a 15-year-old fantasy nerd and recommending which fantasy series they should get into, it will be a tough sell to say, all right, he's basically got like 3 different stories going set in this world, none of which were ever finished. That is a tough sell for someone. Well, I want to know how it ends. Like, well, guess what? You're never going to know. However, at least with House of the Dragon, because it's tackling the Dance of the Dragons, which is a narrative within a larger narrative, we do know how the Dance of the Dragons drew to a close. So that might be one of the only opportunities to have a satisfying conclusion to a George R. R. Martin story on the big or the small screen. But the same holds true for Aegon the Conqueror. We know how the story of Aegon the Conqueror drew to a close, but he's just the first in the Targaryen dynasty, and obviously there's a lot more story that comes after. But at this point, I'm officially babbling. But long story short, I'm looking forward to covering this show on a weekly basis in 2 months' time. And if you've never read Fire and Blood, you've got plenty of time to read it between now and then, whether it's the audio fiction or the book. I would recommend the book first because you have all that incredible Doug Wheatley art, and then listen to the audio fiction, which is also really good as well. In any case, if you like the story and you've not read Fire and Blood, the good news is you have an excellent story to look forward to. But on that note, I'm going to wrap this sucker up. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff. And hope everybody has a great week. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.